Well, good morning, everyone. I just want to kind of get us started on time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. We've got quite a crew here in person, which is lovely to see. And then I see my other Hollywood squares up on the computer. So we will call this meeting to order. It is 9:30 and some seconds. We do have a quorum established, or so I've been told by my incredibly trusted colleagues. So just a quick introduction. We're going to start with the folks here in the room, and then we will go over to the folks online. So we'll start with Laura.
Cruz, Mobility Coordinator for PPACG.
Valerie Anders with Silver Key, CFO.
Diana Rumsey, the independent.
Mary Wagner, Cripple Creek Transportation.
Got it.
I'm Kimmy Chevalier, and I'm the guest presenter talking about my project that I did for my master's at UCCS.
All right, then we will go to folks online. I will just start at the top as folks are appearing for me. That would be Kristen, you're first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Amundsen with Goodwill of Colorado.
And then next is Diana.
Good morning, Diana Van Auken, Teller Senior Coalition.
And then I have Chelsea.
Good morning, everybody. Chelsea Gondek. I am with the Colorado Springs Downtown Partnership.
Okay, and then I have Dick.
Good morning, everybody. Dick Hyde with Community Intersections.
Excellent. Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily with the City of Fountain Transit.
And then Jacob.
Hello, everybody. Jacob Manson, Mountain Metro Transit.
And then I think the last one, is that Ronnie? Am I? Perfect. Ronnie, are you with us?
I think Ronnie's working on getting her mic going, but it's Ronnie Gordon with Teller Senior Coalition.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Did I miss anybody? Because I certainly don't want to miss anybody. All right. Fair enough. All right. Well, then we will move on to the agenda approval. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as it stands?
Dick Hyde, so motions.
And do I have a second?
Diana Van Auken, Teller Senior Coalition. I second that.
Thank you. Any opposed to the agenda as it stands? Okay, seeing nor hearing any opposition, we will move to approve the agenda as it stands.
Well, just everybody.
Okay, everybody in favor of the approval, say aye.
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 And no opposition.
Aye.
Okay. All right, sounds good. We don't have any consent items.
The minutes.
Oh, the minutes, okay. Oh, thank you. Everybody's keeping me honest this morning, which I really appreciate. Okay, so then we have a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, which was the August 22nd meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the August 22nd meeting?
So
Kristen
moved, Chelsea.
Oh, sorry. I'll second Chelsea.
All right. All right, thank you so much. So then can I get a vote to approve the minutes from the August 22nd meeting? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Seeing nor hearing any opposition to the approval of the minutes for August 22nd, we will move to approve. All right, fantastic. Public comments and presentations. All right, we have no public comments. We do have some presentations, but that's later on in the agenda. We also have no action items at this time. And then we can just move on to member appointments. Okay, moving right along. So so I am changing my roles. I am moving out of my current role at the Independence Center and will be taking a position elsewhere. So with that in mind, I will be moving from the Independence Center to an at-large member.
Chelsea, do you want to take the rest of them?
Oh, yeah, I was going to. I didn't know if we cut out on Mike because I heard Deanna speaking and then I didn't. Everything
it's
went
okay.
quiet. Okay, all right. So I think we're going to take each of these as separate motions, correct?
I think we can do it all as one motion.
Oh, okay. Then in that case, Deanna, thank you very much for telling us your information. The next one up we have is Kevin Worley, who serves as the CEO of Worley Enterprises. And I figured I would give everybody an opportunity to kind of introduce themselves. So Kevin, is Kevin in the room?
Kevin is not in the room. I think what we're going to do, because Rebecca is not also not in the room as
Okay.
well, to kick those to the next meeting, so
Okay.
that those folks can join us. We also have Raquel. What is her last name? Can't remember.
Dominguez?
Yes, she did message me this morning. She is not going to be here. She ended up having to have surgery. So
Oh, gosh. Okay.
we'll kick some of these to next month, but since they are not here to attend and let us know a little bit about them, we'll leave it for October.
Okay, then.
So we'll just be voting on Deanna. Deanna has been a great chair for us, and just want to kind of shift her role in her new position. Chelsea, do you want to call for a motion?
Sure. Could we get a motion to approve Deanna moving to an at-large position?
Al with Silver Key.
Val said moved.
Can we get a second?
Diana Van
Dick Hyde
Auken.
seconds.
Got a
Okay.
couple
So-
seconds.
So, Madam Chair and the committee, this is Jared Verner with PPACG. I just want to make sure that we're doing what we want to do. So these still need to be approved by the board. So if we are tabling the other two, they will not be voting members in October. They won't be voting members until November. As long as that's the understanding, I just want to make sure everyone
Yes.
knows what the process is. Okay.
All right, I think we have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Lovely. Deanna, thank you. You get to stay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So with that being said, it looks like we're going to move on to provider presentations. I don't have any particular feelings on who goes first, I am happy to pass the mic over to Kimmy, depending on how the slides are kind of queued up. Okay, one moment.
We are in learning mode today of the system, so just bear with us a little bit.
Okay. Hope everyone can hear me okay, I assume. Good morning. Again, I'm Kimmy Chevalier, and I worked with the Independent Center on conducting a comparative analysis of the transportation in Fort Collins and Colorado Springs for my master's last spring. So I do recognize that time has passed. I'm sure some of these takeaways and recommendations that I put in my presentation might be a little outdated, but I'm just going to go over the project, what it entailed, and my findings from that, and again, what my takeaways and recommendations were. And just on a personal note, I do not identify as someone with a disability, but I do. My sister was blind and she lived in Fort Collins, and she also went to high school here at the Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind. So having that perspective through my life kind of helped guide me on this project. So I just wanted to disclose that. So what I did is I wanted to assess what improvements were needed for the fixed route transportation and evaluate how accessible transit services were for people with disabilities in Colorado Springs compared to Fort Collins. And one reason for picking Fort Collins was, even though population size differs a little bit, they're on a same growth path as Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs and Fort Collins are experiencing population increase and economic growth. They're also both experiencing urban sprawl that is impacting local transportation, and they both anticipate peaking their populations around the same time. So as far as comparing another city in Colorado, this is why we wanted to look at Fort Collins. So with that, when I started my project, I did a lot of background literature reviews and looked at other cities on what they were doing with their transportation in relation to making it more accessible and increasing ridership. And some of the research showed that people with disabilities depend on transportation options to access resources. So that's everything from medical services, going to the grocery store, also social activities. And so without these resources, it really creates it discludes this population from the rest of society a lot of the time, and it leads to the loss of equal opportunities for life activities. Other research was showing that improving the fixed route transportation increased the ridership for marginalized populations, and it decreased the demand on paratransit services. And that also includes, elderly populations as well as people with disabilities. And you'll see as I go into my presentation, it incorporates other genres as well. So when I looked at when I was working on my project, I was pulling what I needed from the research. I took aggregate transportation data from Colorado Springs and Fort Collins. So I looked at surveys that were conducted, between 2017 all the way up to 2021 for both cities. However, after trying to compare what the questions were, what the answers were, there wasn't a lot of meat, so to speak, to my findings from that and being able to show a really in-depth comparison. So then I went to the strategic plans for both cities because, like I said, they both predict that their populations are going to peak around the same time. It's a 5-year gap. So Fort Collins estimates peaking the population at 2040 and Colorado Springs is 2045. Even though the actual numbers are quite different, they are both using these strategic plans for their transportation to really look at what they can do to make these improvements. And so doing that, I was able to kind of extract what their main focuses were, and that was increasing the frequency of bus routes, improving accessibility at bus stops, and improving equity for first and last mile access, and evaluating potential partnerships, and then improving the paratransit customer service. All of these combined are the hopes that this will increase ridership, it'll decrease the need for other resources that could go back into the community. And so after looking at the strategic plans and looking at the surveys, my findings showed that Colorado Springs and Fort Collins are pretty even as far as what they want to implement. Fort Collins has taken a few extra steps already that I think Colorado Springs could look into, and has in some aspects. We know that Colorado Springs added a corridor route onto Hone, and also from like downtown to Citadel. So adding a couple of routes like that has been implemented. Fort Collins implemented what's known as the Max Transit System in 2014, and that is that allows for a 15-minute central corridor along from one end of town to another. So it starts in South Fort Collins and goes all the way up to north of downtown, and it runs right through CSU. So of course that means there's a lot of students that use the bus system. But because they added that in, it increased their ridership. They went from about, I'd have to look at my numbers. I think it was like 2.2. Well, I have to look at my numbers in my paper. But it essentially increased their ridership by, it doubled their ridership. And the other thing that they're starting to look into is implementing mobility innovation zones. And so this entails having basically like a centralized location of, you have like a charging station for cars, you have bus stops that have shelters and amenities, and then you also have really good lighting, you have accessible sidewalks, you have even like schedules, like digital scheduling at the mobility stop. So it centralizes one location for someone to go and then be able to catch the bus. And this helps as the urban sprawl is starting to happen to kind of pinpoint locations around the city where it will attract more riders if they're, if they're on the outskirts of Fort Collins, like by 20 minutes, if they get to downtown, it just creates a little bit better access for people. And then of course the next couple of findings that Fort Collins has implemented is they have a pretty strong app that is, I felt like was pretty user friendly. I played around with it, and I played around with the one from Colorado Springs, and the interface just was really accessible and easy to use, and it had it incorporated Google Maps really well. So looking into something to really hone in on technology. And then with the mobility innovation zones, as well as using these apps and creating partnerships within the community to help solve that first and last mile gap with mobility providers is another takeaway from that strategic plan that Fort Collins is focusing on. And being able to do that would help provide more access for people and creating partnerships within like developments or neighborhoods would be a route that could be looked at. And then, so those were some of the main takeaways on the Fort Collins end. Colorado Springs isn't too far behind because they both are focusing on integrating the ADA bus stops and wanting to make these capital improvements and improving customer service, creating a reservation system that allows for more riders and creating more freedom for riders to have unplanned choices. So maybe having a system that allows them to make last minute changes if they have to go from a medical appointment to the grocery store, they can do that pretty easily, especially if this is their main mode of transportation. And then, so with the takeaways, there's strengths in both transit systems. I think some of the recommendations that can come out of this is that when I was looking at the surveys, Colorado Springs only had one every couple of years or few years that I could find, and Fort Collins was a little bit more consistent with their survey approach. So maybe conducting an onboard survey to gain more information about what parts of the strategic plan are being implemented right now and what issues are still needing to be addressed. Also considering adding more corridor routes, especially as we're pushing out, towards like Powers and up like off Interquest as things are expanding, making sure that there's consideration of adding more corridor routes like the one onto Hone. So it allows for more regular routes or more regular schedules to happen with the buses. And then again, looking at those mobility innovation zones, I think when looking at that, it involves setting up multiple locations so riders can access on the outskirts of town, and then again looking at partnerships to assist with that first and last mile gap. So so that was the project as a whole, and at the bottom of my poster, you can see like the rider profile are pretty in sync when I was looking at comparison or comparing, populations, what kind of rider rides the bus. And when I started this project, my focus was really looking at the accessibility for people with disabilities, but finding that the fixed route as a whole incorporates that piece of it. So when I really took off with the project, this kind of blew up into what you're seeing with the findings and stuff. So almost like a universal design approach. Like if you fix the fixed route transportation, it could really help elevate the transportation needs for people with disabilities in the community. And so on my own, I created an infographic, which is the PDF that I sent as well.
Thank you so much, Kimmy. Does anyone have any questions?
So Jacob Matson, Mountain Metro Transit. So can you define what you mean by more corridor routes?
So, well, that's why when I'm thinking about corridor routes, I'm thinking about like that 15-minute route along to Hone that you can catch in downtown, or going from downtown to Citadel. I don't know if there's potential to expand that like more north. I don't know. I know on Tut there's a bus route on Tut right now that seems to be pretty regular, but as things keep expanding out more north or more east and just incorporating more a route that can stay frequent. So about that 15-20 minute time frame to get from one end to another on a particular corridor. I don't know if that helps answer that.
It does a little bit. So yeah, like,
Okay.
and I'm not sure you said you did this a little while ago, and I know we were at some fairly, significant reductions in service depending on the time frame you're looking at. But our main northern connection that's at that rate of 15-minute frequency is our Route 25, which does go from the Citadel up to the Voyager transfer station. So there is that in terms of the north connection. So just want to make sure I was understanding what you meant by corridor. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Jacob, along those lines, I had a really quick question because one of the, okay. Jacob, so along those lines, no pun intended, I was wondering, so Kimmy had mentioned kind of having these almost like little transportation hubs kind of strategically placed throughout various parts of the city as we continue to kind of look at that urban sprawl. So like, a little hub in the north and one in the south and one in the east and one. So I'm wondering if potentially that's a conversation that's already happening or potentially could happen at some point as we continue to kind of move folks out and away from these centralized locations of downtown, that maybe that might be a potential opportunity for us to kind of congregate folks so that they can then go to one specific location and then kind of be transported out accordingly, almost like spokes on a wheel.
I think I understand what you're getting at. So, I mean, our system is already set up as a hub and spoke, kind of a modified hub and spoke system where we have that. We mentioned the Citadel, and I commented on the Voyager transfer station. We have PPSC down in the south. So we kind of have that areas. Are you referring to something that's like more kind of further out of like our general region, like almost like a commuter bus service that would bring people from further out in? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Well, one of the things that Fort Collins is implementing, and please, Kimmy, correct me if I'm wrong, are almost these like little hubs where you've got like charging stations and scooters and bus shelters and places that you can kind of get information.
Yes. Okay.
So those kinds of, and it's really well lit, so people feel really safe and kind of going there. You can park your car if you need to charge your car. You can, whatever, and then kind of people can disperse out accordingly. So it's just a really nice, and it's very inviting, aesthetically pleasing, and people feel safe kind of going there and then being jettisoned and transported out accordingly. So it was a really interesting model. And when I was looking at some of the schematics for it, it looked very promising and certainly something that would be, I think, a really big draw for writers if they saw something like that in their neighborhood or somewhere close to their neighborhood.
I'll take kind of two approaches. This one, I'll put a plug in for PPACG, and as you're aware, Deanna, we're working on that long range transportation plan, getting lots of involvement with that. We're about here with transit. We're about ready to kick off. Actually, tomorrow we're kicking off our regional transit plan for that's specific to Mountain Metro Transit. As well as kind of get on the electrical charging. We're looking at ZEV and more in our fleet, the zero emission vehicle. So there are some of those efforts underway. More, I guess, recent in a way, or more kind of moving more forward, is we are working with Pike Ride, who does the bicycle rental program here. So in terms of working with them to see where can we partner together on where we can make some of these connections, and kind of getting back to that first last mile connection is definitely something we're always looking into. It kind of goes back and forth, but I do want to do what's called a comprehensive operations analysis sometime here in the hopefully not too distant future. But with all these different plans going on, there's just a lot going on right now, which that would involve kind of a full analytical look at our system and see what's working, what's not, where can we do improvements, where can we partner together. So issues such as as this would play a role in that. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm really excited to see what the future holds for the region's transportation.
Mm-hmm. I was just gonna say that what just popped up is the infographic that I created, and this kind of helps simplify everything onto just one source, and just highlighting that, improving the fixed route transportation by making essential improvements can really decrease that demand on paratransit and then increase ridership altogether. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Yeah.
While she's pulling that up, I guess I'll make my comment. I think y'all are kind of referring to what we in transportation speak we call a mobility hub. And so, it's kind of a souped up park and ride, to be honest. And so I think when I give a little bit of like the transit planning update, which Jacob's kind of already kicked off, and he'll talk a little bit more as well. But these are great ideas to start bringing to the table as we begin to kick off the transit plan and specialized transit plan. So I just want everybody to know that there is a little bit of a good timing for folks to have the opportunity to give input into those and have these sort of innovative ideas. I think Jacob and I are both kind of looked at this as we want a fresh start and fresh eyes at what this may look like for the future. So, yeah, you have a platform. I just want to let you guys know that. And as we kind of start the public engagement process, this group will definitely be involved in conversations around these different things that we may be able to do in the future. So
Exciting. Thank you. All right, so moving along, this is my presentation. So 'tis the season for transportation, which is all season long. So I did a capstone project for my master's in public health, looking at transportation systems, especially as they relate to older adults and people with disabilities. So as you all may or may not be aware, there are a lot of guidelines around transportation, how it's built, how it's accessed, what it looks like, lots of rules and regulations and guidelines. It can get a little bit overwhelming. So you have the Americans with Disabilities Act, you've got the PROWAG, which is going to be signed in very shortly, before the end of the year for sure, but it's been sitting there since 2011, 2013, something like that. You've got the MUTCD, which is the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. You've got ANSI, you've got IBC rules, you've got all kinds of rules and regs, and that's just for the infrastructure for the most part. We're not even touching on the actual vehicles themselves. That's a whole nother talk show. So with that in mind, this first slide just kind of gets a really good overview of how many people are truly we talking about. So we've got 56 million Americans who are older adults who rely on public transportation. We've got 67 million Americans that identify as a person with disability. And then, and at any given time, we've got about 14.5 million Americans that rely on public transportation for whatever reason that was, whether they opt not to own their own vehicle, whether it's due to socioeconomic status or some kind of interim thing that's happening, their car is in repair, what have you. So it's a lot of people that we're talking about, which is why the conversation continues to be going on in these communities of how can we do this better, more efficiently, and continue to transport folks, because these numbers are just going to continue to grow. The disability community is the only community at any time that anybody can join. Certainly older adults, we're continuing to look at this kind of upside down demographic as people continue to age and the baby boomers are getting older. So we're just going to continue to have needs, and certainly people who are transit dependent. Again, when we look at economic statuses, when we look at urban sprawls, when we look at affordability of housing and all of these things, these numbers are just going to get bigger. They're not going to get smaller. No, you're totally fine. And we're moving on to the next slide, which is great. It's totally fine. Public health impacts of transportation. Of course, adequate and appropriate public transportation helps people get to where they need to go, whether that's to doctor's appointments, social engagement components, commerce, economic development. When we talk about economic development, I always like to remind folks, like if people can't get out of their houses, they're not going to be spending money in the community. They're going to be spending money online. And when we talk about keeping those dollars in the community and really supporting small businesses, this is why public transportation is so incredibly vital. Consequences, I can tell you from a strictly health-related perspective, people with disabilities are 4 times more likely to report their health as fair to poor compared to non-disabled peers. And a lot of that is about, I don't have access to my primary care provider. I don't have access to social engagement components. I don't have access to volunteering and economic components such as employment opportunities. Older adults who are socially isolated are more likely to report increased symptom severity. They actually did a wonderful study specifically on people with Parkinson's disease, but it certainly applies to other diagnoses as well, that just based on social isolation status or perceived social isolation status, they were reporting up to 5 times more severity in all of their symptoms across all components. So motor impairments, autonomic, cognitive, psychological symptoms. That was just on loneliness. And as we look at the CDC is certainly having more and more conversations about loneliness being a social determinant of health. All right, next slide. So the aim of my project was to develop an assessment tool for transportation professionals to assess accessibility for older adults and people with disabilities. As I alluded to earlier, there are a lot of guidelines. It can be incredibly cumbersome. One person so lovingly said, like, these agencies don't create anything that's less than 100 pages. That gets really overwhelming for folks, right? They want something that's easy to access, that they can kind of get a high level view of like what's going right, what's going wrong, where are the gaps, and then where do they need to start funneling resources and inserting pieces into the strategic plan based on the findings that they have. All right, next slide. All right, so we took vehicles completely out of this equation because I found pretty early on that was going to be like a whole nother project in the making. Vehicles in terms of accessibility features was out of the scope of this particular project. But I did really want to focus on trip planning and booking, wayfinding and navigation, bus terminals and transportation hubs, pedestrian access, alighting and boarding, and rail platforms. So from these specific categories, there are currently over 50 or over 40 separate indicators addressed within these categories. And again, this is pulling from all different resources. This is looking at the ADA. This is looking at ProWAG. This is looking at MUTCD. This is looking at, IBC and ANSI guidelines. All of these pieces are kind of thrown into this assessment because what I was hearing from transportation professionals is they really wanted something much more tenable to look at instead of having to kind of traverse back and forth between all of these other documents. So next slide. Okay, so I had some lovely conversations with, in fact, some people who are currently on this call. So thank you so much again for your time and talent and input. But I asked these transportation professionals in a variety of different settings, so urban, rural, mountain towns, what are some things that need to be included on this assessment that is going to make it better? What are we looking at in terms of transportation? This question was, what are some challenges with pedestrian access? And over and over and again, I heard signage to direct people to where they need to go. Somebody, very kindly said, people who are blind and low vision, there isn't good direction for them. They're going to go by and not even know that they're there. So they have to make things clear, marked, and consistent. That was the other conversation that kept coming up. Things need to be consistent from one location to another so that people have a better idea of where signage is, where they can access information. And especially when you're talking about older adults, it can get really overwhelming. If there is no magic switch that goes on when somebody, for whatever reason, is no longer able to drive their own vehicle. They don't magically wake up one day and say, oh, now I feel completely confident and competent in taking public transportation. That doesn't happen. So the more that we can keep things consistent and feel safe, then we can onboard other pieces through training that will help people feel competent in accessing public transportation in their community, thereby allowing them to continue to live life on their terms as they age in place. And that's really what we want. We want folks to have life the way that they want it, and be able to age successfully in place and be healthy and safe and continue to contribute, to go to their grandkids' recitals, to go out, to have lunch with their friends, to go to, religious events or social opportunities or what have you. So it's really important that things feel the same from one place to another. Otherwise, people get really confused really quickly. They get frustrated. Their prefrontal cortex kind of shuts down because they're emotionally overwhelmed, and they say, forget it, I'm never doing this again. And then that's it, right? So we need to create ways to have the best possible experience for folks. And one of the things that really contributes to that is consistency. All right, next slide. Differences in delivery based on location. Again, this is not a one size fits all. I did an extensive literature review, and there's everything from people in really rural communities who are using kind of a voucher program, because oftentimes when you're looking at folks who are really out there in terms of geography, it's difficult, right? It's you're not going to have a bus that's going to come by all the time. And yet, how do we get folks out of their homes into the community? One of the things that was tried and actually really successful was individuals who needed those kinds of accommodations were given kind of like these little voucher books so that they could have some dignity and some autonomy and pay their neighbors or pay their relatives or whoever to give them a ride somewhere, right? So it created this sense of like, okay, I have ownership, and I am really honoring the service that my friend or my neighbor or my loved one is giving to me to provide me with this ride to where I want to go. So that was a really successful program. There are various other pieces, and we can certainly talk about them offline, or you can ask me questions later. But this was a 9-month project, and we don't have time to kind of go into all of the different solutions. But I will tell you, the other thing that kind of continued to come up in the literature was that one of the other deterrents to people taking public transportation was drivers not being really well trained in etiquette for older adults or people with disabilities, and riders getting really frustrated and saying really offhand comments like, oh, I can't believe so-and-so is getting on the bus and they're taking so long, and why do we have to stop for this person, what have you. And that creates, again, a negative riding experience for that individual. And they say, well, the driver wasn't nice to me, or the passengers weren't nice, they were clearly frustrated, I don't want to ever do this again. So just like little things to keep in mind that aren't so little to the person who's experiencing them, that I think we can really make a difference in terms of how do we train folks. And I'm not saying that this came up for riders here in the community, because I think for the most part, our transportation providers and our drivers are doing a really good job and being incredibly compassionate and empathetic and generous. But it's certainly something to kind of keep top of mind as we look at future training, that's something that we need to continue to emphasize because it does make a huge difference on people's experiences and their willingness to continue to access those services. Next slide. I think that's it. Yay, okay. That was a lot of information, and I appreciate that I spoke really quickly because I get excited about this topic. So any questions?
I think talking about consistency, when I was doing the needs assessment this past year, specifically for those that have no vision, I never thought about their challenges in terms of identifying a bus stop, specifically those that are not, that they don't have a bench anymore, that are actually just poles that have signs on them. And I think Mountain Metro has tried to do a good job at making those poles different. But I had never thought about putting myself in their shoes and trying to figure out, am I standing next to a no parking sign, or am I standing next to the actual bus stop? And I think I've mentioned this to a couple of people on this call, that a couple of months ago, my husband and I were driving down 19th Street and on our way to play tennis. And there was a guy in the middle of the street just with his arms up screaming, "I don't know where I am. I don't know where I am." And people were just driving by him thinking that he had some sort of mental illness or whatnot. And I saw his cane, and I was like, oh man, this guy literally is walking in the middle of 19th Street and he has no clue. So my husband and I, we stopped and we asked him, what's going on? And he was like, I had a friend drop me off and I don't know where I am. And I need to get to Uinta 19th and Uinta. And so we walked him down the street to where he needed to go. And it's just amazing to me if you think about those challenges that low no vision folks deal with. It's crazy. I can't imagine that. But it is something from a consistency perspective. How do we help out those, not even those that are low no vision, but we know that consistency even within ourselves is important. And it does contribute to a good experience. Coming from Chattanooga, at least in our downtown area, each one of our bus stops had a sort of an overhang. There wasn't a bench there, an overhang, and then it had a actual map of the bus stop and frequency of that bus stop, and it was consistent throughout the downtown area, so it was easily recognizable. There is a shelter there. I know that there's kind of this fear when you have benches that people will congregate at the benches, but it was a shelter in terms of an awning, and it had the bus stop really predominant on top of it. And so I think, yeah, how do we create better experiences for folks, and what is the cost of that? I think that's important. So thanks, Deanna.
I have a question. So I should probably know this, but I don't use public transportation on a regular basis, however, is that if you do have low vision, how do you know to identify that this is the stop I want off? If you can't visually, is it, announcing where they're at in the buses, or?
That's a great question. Part of that is about training. So there are certainly some drivers, and as I talked to individuals in the community, there are certainly some drivers who will make that announcement. Some buses are equipped with the ability to kind of call out the stop, but sometimes that equipment works and sometimes it doesn't. And so what I consistently hear from folks is they try to be as proactive as possible and advocate for themselves and say, hey, I want to get off here and here. Can you make sure that you announce when you're actually coming to that stop? So it requires some kind of advocacy on the part of the rider, and then cooperation from the driver, which I hear more often than not is actually happening, which is fabulous. But you're right. I mean, it can be very disconcerting. The other part was that once individuals get off of the vehicle, it can be a little challenging to figure out what direction they should be walking. And certainly we can have a whole nother conversation offline about pedestrian access signals, and some of the modifications that could be made that would help people. Because as you can imagine, if you go and you push the little button, but it just chirps, like you don't know if that's chirping for which direction, which street. Is it like, the walk light is on for South Tejon, or the walk light is on, you don't know unless it specifically gives you that audio signal. And there are certainly capabilities. But so there's lots and lots of options as far as technology that would really go a long way to supporting people having a better, safer experience. So they don't just kind of get lost and go, I don't know what that chirping means. I don't know which light is on. It doesn't cue me. So anyway.
I don't know which way I'm facing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So
I can't imagine.
Yeah. Any other questions? It's a great conversation. Okay, seeing or hearing none, we will move on. But if anything comes up after we close out the meeting, feel free to contact us. I would be happy to continue the conversation. Like I said, it's a passion of mine and I'm always happy to talk about it. So, all right. So next on the component, it looks like training. So we've got the CASTA report out.
Yes, that is me, Laura Cruz. And feel free for those that did attend the conference, if you have anything that you want to share that you didn't already share or already that I didn't already share, feel free to chime in. Just a couple of highlights from the CASTA conference. On some of the sessions that I attended that I wanted to share about, but also just some general remarks that were provided by FTA and CDOT that y'all may be interested in. But kind of thinking about the mobility hub conversation, one of the sessions that I attended was actually parking and transit, which sounded really exciting. But I learned a lot. A lot of cities are doing a parking and transit, a cohesive plan with those two in mind. Thinking about where can we create these sort of access hubs to direct people to certain parking areas and then provide adequate transit from those parking areas. So essentially, limiting parking in specific areas to provide for more, literally more space for economic development, businesses and those types of things. And as you're planning around your city, creating these designated parking areas. We've all been to cities where you had like a visitors parking area, and we have a couple of them here in Colorado Springs. But sort of looking at it from the perspective of how you have those areas available, and then what does that look like in terms of access to transit? Because ultimately, if you want to funnel people there to a centralized location, you have to be able to get them to the places they want to go. So it's quite interesting. Crested Butte and Durango both spoke on their efforts. And while those are very different towns than Colorado Springs and our other towns, I mean, it's something also to think about in areas like Woodland Park in particular and Cripple Creek. You guys up in Cripple Creek have a pretty great circular around town. And those designated lots on both sides of town that is great. So some of these cities are kind of thinking about the same thing. So as we're trying to make some connectivities, I thought that was a pretty interesting session. Couple of other things that came out of the CASTA conference was I attended the Human Service Transportation meeting, and we actually have a committee that meets at each conference for our human service transportation providers. And one of the things that I just want to put a plug in here is we found that there is not a lot of actual providers attending that committee. It's more of our mobility managers across the state. So we would like to have more of our specialized transit human service transportation providers attending those committee meetings at the CASTA conferences. So if you just didn't know that was something for you, it's a great time to just connect with your peers across the state who are providing similar services. And we get to talk about some high level issues that we're really seeing from a state perspective. So one of the things that we've talked a lot about is veteran transportation. We also kicked off the conversation around day program transportation and how that's affecting the overall system. And it's something that CASTA wants to know about. I know that the mobility managers, including myself, try to raise your concerns to CASTA on a regular basis. But these are opportunities for you to talk with your peers around these similar issues. And what comes out of that is potential for, different legislation that we may want to, that CASTA may want to propose to help agencies in particular, or different programs that may be supported by state dollars in the future. So I think it's important to kind of get plugged into some of these committees at those conferences. So we talked a lot about those two things, veteran transportation and day program transportation. And I think those are things we want to dig a little bit more into. And I'll definitely be reaching out to this group. We've already started those conversations within this group a long time ago. But we're continuing that and hoping we can have some action items out of that committee in the future. So as far as like FTA and CDOT announcements, FTA made a pretty exciting announcement. However, it has a caveat to it. In the presidential budget, FTA, in the presidential budget, President Biden has included provisions in there that would eliminate the match requirement for 5310 and 5311 programs. And 5310 programs is for seniors and individuals with disabilities in the urbanized areas, and 5311 programs is the traditional fixed route in rural areas. And so that's exciting news. However, we know with the with the budgeting process, and we see that playing out right now, that the federal budget gets, eaten up and spit out like 5 different times until they actually land on something. But I think it's important for you guys to know that that is in there. And it's also an opportunity for you guys as agencies that benefit from those programs to advocate with your federal legislators. I'm trying to get some more information that hopefully like a 1-pager or whatnot together so that you guys can have and talk to your legislators about what that impact would mean for your agencies. It's exciting. It's something that we've been kind of advocating for. It's something that Melissa and I brought to the table when we were in DC at the NADTC meeting last year. So as far as CDOT, I know that many on the call are really struggling and have been for almost 2 years now with contracting and with contracting on your operations funding as well as your capital funding, and not being able to access your funds that are needed for both of those things. And so one of the things that was reported out at the CASTA conference is CDOT feels like they will be caught up by this time next year, which is a little bit concerning. And it's also something that the CASTA board is pushing for a little more of a timeline that makes sense, that isn't so negatively impacting our transit agencies. So interesting enough, the new DTR director contacted us this week wanting to set up a meeting to talk about what are the challenges actually up in Teller County, because we had the RCC meeting last week. And in talking with Andy and John, we wanted to expand that conversation beyond Teller to our full service area of El Paso County and Park counties. And just being able to communicate at a higher level beyond Glenn, beyond Glenn to our new DTR director about the issues and how this is impacting us currently as well as in the future, knowing that they're stating that it's going to take them a year to get caught up. So I've asked several of you guys that are on the call for y'all to attend that meeting. I said to Andy, you know, I can communicate the things that you guys have communicated to me, but I think it's important to give you guys the opportunity to speak for yourself. So that's something that we value and want to make sure you have that opportunity. I know it was a quick turnaround for that meeting, but I think it's important if you guys can attend, and if you can't attend, please let me know, and please share with me any kind of talking points that you may want us to communicate. If we don't see a lot of movement, we are not afraid as a COG to raise our concerns even higher. So it's something that we did earlier this year when your operating funds were not coming through. We raised it to the to CDOT's CEO, Shoshana Liu, and so we are not afraid to do that moving forward if we need to step in that way. So the meeting is Friday at let me look at the time. Most everybody was invited. If the only one that I wasn't sure, the only two that I wasn't sure that had anything to present to this is Kristen from Goodwill. If you guys have any issues that you want to raise, feel free to reach out to me and I'll get you invited. It's at 2:30 and it's just a Teams call. It's not an in-person. And then also Dick with Community Intersections. If you guys are impacted anyway, just please communicate with me. And I'll try to get you guys invited to that meeting. It's a quick meeting. It's an hour. So I'm asking for you to be prepared to just very briefly talk about your projects that are sitting in your queue that you can't move forward on, and what that impact is to your current programs. Any questions on that? Gail. Hey, Gail.
I did take down my hand. I was just curious what date it was and what time. So thank you, Laura.
Yes, and Megan has actually accepted that.
Good.
So. All right. Those are my updates from those two things. Just one last thing that's not on this agenda. We're already kind of planning for our next RFP or NOFA to go out for the AAA funding and 5310 funding in particular. And so look for more information about that in the near future. We're looking at potentially launching that NOFA in November with a longer time for you guys to work on those applications. I know it's through the holidays, but we're giving you much longer time, and those applications being due in January. So Melody and I are working on that, and we'll continue working on that and stay in communication with you guys.
So Laura, is that going to be for AAA, all AAA and transportation?
That's correct. Yeah.
Val, were you saying? My question was, is that for all of AAA and transportation? And Laura said yes.
So we're giving you more than a month. We're giving you our hope is to give you a couple of months to do this. So yeah, stay tuned.
Well, I have another question. Is the funding going to stay flat, do you believe, for next year? So
yes.
Okay.
And just a kind of an addition to that, and just kind of an explanation. Our funding is distributed to us through basically a formula, and we're not in the we do not have the ability to leverage a lot of additional dollars as the type of organization we are. We are not a 501c3 nonprofit. We are a government entity. So the only way that we get additional dollars is if it gets allocated to us by the state or by the feds. And so while we go through an extensive process to designate those funds through utilizing our committees to look over the applications and whatnot, ultimately, we cannot solve some of these challenging issues that I know you guys are facing in terms of your increased needs. We can advocate for more as an agency, but ultimately, because of the type of agency we are, we don't have the ability to really go after a lot of additional funding, which has always been a challenge for us as staff who come from the nonprofit world. So.
Great. So the transit plan update, who will be doing that one?
I forgot. Sorry. And Jacob, feel free to chime in. I'm just going to be very high level. As Jacob mentioned, we're doing our kickoff with our consultant company tomorrow, and so over the next several weeks/months, we'll be kind of laying the framework in terms of our work plans, and that's not just from a project identification side of it, but also the public engagement piece of it. And so while our timeline is a little bit compressed than what we initially wanted, based upon just kind of a challenge with moving of funds by CDOT. And so we're looking at a 9-month window to complete the plan. And it's actually a little bit smaller than that because it has to go through the committee process. But I think we have a good outline based upon a lot of y'all's input over the past few years of what our needs are for the community in terms of looking at this plan. And our transit plans are directly tied to our federal funding and what we can use our federal funds for in this area. So it's important to be involved in that process because ultimately, if there's projects in the future that you have in mind that could benefit the community, that you vetted with the community, vetted with your ridership, then if it's not in those plans, we can't really direct federal funds to it. So it's important. Now, the transit plan and specialized transit plan are specifically for our urbanized area. However, we will be looking as well at a little bit more of a regional perspective. We haven't defined what that region looks like because we understand that we need to figure out how to get people in for services, right? And so there will be some crossover for those that are in the rural areas outside of our urbanized area. A lot of this planning is done through CDOT. So our hope is that when CDOT is doing their transit plan, which I think is going to kick off the transit update to their plan, that they will take our considerations into their planning efforts. But ultimately, we'll be working in 2 different plans for the rural area and for the urbanized area. So any questions about that? Great. I've talked a lot about this in the past. It's just finally happening. So we're excited about it. I know Jacob and I, this is sort of a new thing for both of us to be project managers on. So, but it's kind of nice because we have a fresh look on it. So cool. That's it.
All right. Well, if there are no questions about any of those pieces, we can move on to one of my favorite segments, which is information sharing. So this is the opportunity to kind of just share out anything that's exciting that's happening on your end and share with the group so that we can celebrate, so that we can support, so that we can show up. So who would like to start us off? Anybody have anything to share?
it's also good if you have any challenges you want to share as well. We know that it's not always rainbows and butterflies.
Mary Wagner from Cripple Creek. I really appreciate the great sharing today by Deanna and Kim. That was very, very helpful. And I just want to put a plug in for Ted Schweitzer puts together an RC meeting every couple of months, and it pulls together all the sister organizations and CDOT-COMS and LoRa-COMS, and it's a great opportunity for the community to tell each other this person needs that and this person needs that, and many times we don't know unless somebody tells us what's needed, and it's a great opportunity, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for today. It was great.
So Jacob Matson with Mountain Metro, just to let you guys know, we're the final week of preparing for our service change, which will go into effect on Sunday. Kind of to one of Kimmy's comments earlier about the corridor service, one of our changes for this upcoming fall that we're putting out there is adding an additional line on Saturdays and Sundays out there along the Nevada corridor between the downtown terminal and Southgate Road, which will basically turn that corridor to 15-minute service on the weekends as well. So that's kind of one of the more exciting things there. We've had very, very high ridership, 20 plus passengers per revenue service hour on weekends on those routes, the 10 and 11. So we need to, we're looking to offset that and get more frequent service down that corridor, which is the bulk of the ridership for our 10 and 11. And then we have a couple other little minor changes, additional bus stops that we're going to be using. And I know I've explained it a few times, but the Route 20 is really the big thing going on, I think, this fall. So hopefully that works out well for us.
That's awesome, Jacob.
Anyone else? All right, well then I will just share the Independence Center is having a luncheon for the electeds. So this is the state folks, so congressmen and senators on October 24th, and you can bet your bottom dollar that transportation will be part of that conversation. It is a topic that is near and dear to the Independence Center's heart, and we will continue to encourage our electeds to think about the transportation needs of their constituents as they are voting on legislation as it comes down this upcoming session. So just thought I'd share that out with you. We will be feeding them generously, but we will also be speaking to them ad nauseum about some of the concerns that are in the community.
Deanna?
Yes.
So, Diana from Teller Senior Coalition, TSC Transit. I just wanted to say we are continuing to exceed all prior ridership numbers in our area. We provide door-through-door transportation throughout Teller County, Eastern Park County, and Western El Paso County, throughout Teller County and into Colorado Springs. And our ridership is doing very, very well. And we've been able to add additional vehicles and drivers and support. So it's going really well. Thanks.
That's great. I really appreciate that. When you and I have had conversations, I've always been incredibly impressed with the service delivery model that you all have going on up there. And so keep up the good work. And I'm so glad you guys are able to kind of get the vehicles you need and the support you need to make all of that stuff happen for your community members. So congratulations.
Thanks, Deanna. We're honored to do it. Appreciate it.
Anyone else? All right, seeing and hearing no more comments, that concludes those segments. Okay, so some of the items for the next meeting. will be the Invita report out on the on-demand pilot program. Super excited to hear how that went. Determining November, December meeting and driver appreciation. Driver appreciation, again, is a event that is near and dear to my heart. I'm so excited every year when we get to do that. Chair roles for 2024. And then it looks like some of the pieces for this meeting have been moved down to the next meeting, which would be the TRE appointment, Kevin Worley and Rebecca Shields. Is that accurate? Okay. I am seeing some heads nodding. Okay, fantastic. So anything else that we need to put on? No. Okay. All right. Well, if that is all we have this morning, I will gift you all the time back. We've got about 10:45. We will adjourn the meeting. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Enjoy this fall weather. It's pumpkin spice everything season. And I am told that the leaves are starting to turn. And so please feel free to go out and avail yourself of that beautiful opportunity. Thank you so much, and we will see you next month.